The sterile scent of antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with the faint hum of monitors and the shuffle of hurried footsteps echoing down the hospital's pristine corridors. In the corner of room 307, Nurse Danielle Carter adjusted the IV drip with steady hands, her calm demeanor betraying the storm brewing in her chest. Her deep brown eyes, full of quiet resilience, scanned the vitals on the monitor. She prided herself on professionalism, even when the unspoken weight of being one of the few black nurses in a prestigious private hospital bore down on her daily. As she worked, Dr. Nathan Harding strode into the room. Tall, with sharp features and an air of self-importance, he glanced briefly at the elderly woman lying unconscious on the bed before his piercing blue eyes landed on Danielle. His voice cut through the room like a scalpel, cold and dismissive. "Carter, do you think this is the time for chit-chat with the patient's family?" he barked, nodding toward the couple seated quietly in the corner. Danielle stiffened, but kept her expression neutral. She had only been offering them a few words of reassurance, a moment of kindness in the face of uncertainty. "Just explaining the care plan, Doctor," Danielle replied evenly, refusing to let the sharpness in his tone rattle her. "Well, maybe you should stick to what you're qualified for," he sneered, his gaze narrowing. "Leave the explanations to those of us with a medical degree." The couple exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort evident. Danielle's heart clenched, but she held her ground, swallowing the wave of indignation, threatening to spill over. She couldn't afford to lose her composure, not in front of patients, not here, not now. Nathan continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's no wonder some people never advance beyond their station. Mediocrity, after all, is a choice." Danielle's hands tightened around the clipboard she held, her knuckles whitening. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a mix of anger and humiliation, threatening to undo the years of hard-earned restraint she had built in this environment. The room seemed to hold its breath as the tension thickened. But before she could respond, the frail woman on the bed stirred, her eyelids fluttering open weakly. Nathan's expression shifted instantly, his tone adopting a sugary politeness as he turned toward the patient. "Well, Mrs. Ellis, you're finally awake. Let's see how we're doing today," he said, plastering on a professional smile. But what Nathan didn't realize, and what Danielle was beginning to suspect, was that this patient was far more than she appeared to be. Danielle stepped back, her mind racing with questions. Why does this woman seem so familiar? Why did her family seem so guarded when they arrived? The answers would change everything, and what Danielle did next would not only shatter the walls of prejudice within this hospital, but also reveal truths that no one in the room was prepared for. Danielle Carter had always known she was destined for something greater. Born and raised in the heart of Chicago's South Side, she had grown up in a world where grit and resilience were not just virtues, but survival tools. Her mother, a retired schoolteacher, and her father, a Vietnam veteran turned mechanic, had instilled in her the value of hard work and compassion. They had worked tirelessly to ensure she had opportunities they never did, emphasizing the importance of education as her ticket out of the systemic hardships they had endured. Danielle had taken their lessons to heart. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a nurse. Not just any nurse, but one who made a real difference in her patients' lives. She wanted to be the calm in their storm, the voice of hope in their darkest hours. Her journey wasn't easy. She had juggled multiple jobs while attending nursing school, often studying late into the night after exhausting shifts at a diner. But every sleepless night and sacrifice paid off when she graduated at the top of her class. Yet, even with her credentials and work ethic, the road remained rocky. As a black woman in a predominantly white, high-ranking hospital, Danielle faced daily microaggressions and unspoken biases. Some colleagues dismissed her suggestions, while others undermined her authority in subtle yet cutting ways. But Danielle had learned to rise above it, leaning on her inner strength and an unshakable belief in her purpose. Still, it wasn't without its toll. Some nights, the weight of it all threatened to crush her spirit. She often found herself asking, "When will my work speak louder than their prejudices? When will they see me for the professional I am, not just my skin color?" The towering glass facade of Havencrest Medical Center gleamed under the morning sun, a beacon of hope for the city's elite. Known for its cutting-edge technology and top-tier specialists, it catered to high-profile patients, politicians, celebrities, and business moguls alike. But beneath the hospital's polished exterior was an unspoken hierarchy. Doctors reigned supreme, especially those like Nathan Harding, whose Ivy League credentials and connections afforded him an air of invincibility. Nathan was everything Danielle wasn't: privileged, entitled, and utterly unaware of the struggles of those beneath him. He had a reputation for being brilliant but arrogant, often belittling staff he deemed inferior. Danielle had crossed paths with him several times, each interaction more draining than the last. She knew he viewed her as little more than a cog in the machine, replaceable and unworthy of his respect. Yet Havencrest wasn't without its merits. The hospital's resources and reputation allowed Danielle to access advanced training and work with groundbreaking procedures. Despite the challenges, she refused to let anyone drive her away. Her patients were what mattered, and they deserved the best care she could give. Danielle first noticed the Ellis family when they arrived earlier that day. They didn't fit the typical profile of Havencrest's patients. Mr. and Mrs. Ellis were modestly dressed, their faces etched with worry as they accompanied their frail mother, Martha Ellis, into the hospital. There was an air of quiet dignity about them, but something about their demeanor struck Danielle as unusual. They were reserved, almost guarded, as if they carried a secret they weren't ready to share. Martha Ellis, despite her weakened state, exuded a quiet grace. Her silver hair framed a face that seemed familiar, though Danielle couldn't place where she had seen it before. The family had spoken little during the initial check-in, only offering the necessary medical information before retreating to the corner of the room. Danielle had made a mental note to check on them later, sensing they needed reassurance. What Danielle didn't realize at the time was how pivotal this family would become in the unfolding events. The day had started like any other, with Danielle managing her usual workload of patients and tasks. She had just finished prepping room 307 when Nathan Harding stormed in, his usual air of superiority filling the space. From the moment he spoke, Danielle knew it was going to be one of those encounters, draining, demeaning, and utterly predictable. As Nathan directed his barbs toward her, Danielle couldn't help but feel the familiar pang of frustration. Why does he always feel the need to assert his dominance? She wondered. She had seen his type before. Men who mistook their privilege for superiority, who viewed people like her as obstacles to their inflated egos. What Nathan failed to notice, or perhaps deliberately ignored, was that Danielle's calm exterior masked a reservoir of strength. She had faced far greater challenges than his verbal jabs, and she wasn't about to let him break her spirit. Still, the humiliation stung, and she couldn't help but wonder how long she could endure this without pushing back. As Nathan's tirade continued, Danielle's attention flicked back to Martha Ellis. Something about the woman's presence felt significant. Danielle couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she had seen her before. Was it in the news? A photograph? Her curiosity grew when she noticed how the Ellis family reacted to Nathan's behavior. While they remained outwardly composed, there was a flicker of something in their eyes. Disapproval, perhaps even anger. It was subtle, but unmistakable. What were they hiding? And why did Danielle feel that the answers were just within reach, waiting to unravel a truth she wasn't prepared for? The questions lingered in her mind as she braced herself for the challenges ahead. Unbeknownst to Danielle, the events about to unfold would test her courage, shake the very foundation of Havencrest Medical Center, and force everyone in that room to confront the biases and assumptions that had gone unchecked for far too long. The hospital corridors buzzed with the usual hum of activity, monitors beeping, pages echoing overhead, and the shuffle of hurried footsteps. For Danielle, the morning had already stretched her patience to its limits, thanks to Nathan Harding's arrogance. Yet she pushed forward, as she always did, focusing on her patients and letting their gratitude fuel her resolve. Danielle had just stepped into room 307 to check on Martha Ellis. The elderly woman lay quietly, her frail hands resting on the starched hospital sheets. Danielle offered her a warm smile. "Mrs. Ellis, how are you feeling?" she asked softly, adjusting the IV line. Martha's kind eyes met Danielle's, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. "Better, dear, thanks to you. You have a gift for making people feel at ease." The words were like balm to Danielle's soul. Here she felt valued. But the tranquility of the moment was interrupted by a sharp knock. Nathan Harding strode in, his white coat billowing like a cape of self-importance. He glanced at Danielle with barely concealed disdain before addressing Martha. "Good morning, Mrs. Ellis," he said in his clipped tone. "I'll be overseeing your case. Let's get this moving quickly." Nathan didn't wait for a response before pulling out Martha's chart, his brow furrowing as he reviewed her vitals. "You've been here longer than expected. Why hasn't the pre-op been scheduled?" he asked, his accusatory gaze landing on Danielle. Danielle took a steadying breath. "I was waiting for Dr. Singh's confirmation on the new medication protocol before proceeding. It's standard practice for patients with her condition." Nathan's scoff was loud enough to turn heads outside the room. "Standard practice or just an excuse for inefficiency?" he shot back. Danielle's fists clenched at her sides. "Stay professional," she reminded herself. Dr. Singh requested the delay for patient safety. "If you have concerns, you're welcome to take it up with him directly." Nathan's expression darkened. "Don't lecture me on procedure," he snapped, his tone icy. "You're here to assist, not to question decisions." The exchange left a heavy silence in the room, broken only by Martha's weak cough. Danielle cast a quick glance at the Ellis family. While Martha seemed unfazed, her son and daughter exchanged uneasy looks, their discomfort palpable. Later that day, Danielle took solace in her interactions with other patients. In room 312, a young boy recovering from surgery broke into a grin as she delivered a balloon someone had sent him. In room 210, an elderly man held her hand and thanked her for her kindness. These moments reminded her why she endured the challenges of her job. But her reprieve was short-lived. At every turn, Nathan seemed intent on undermining her. He questioned her in front of colleagues, dismissed her suggestions during rounds, and even made condescending remarks about her background. The breaking point came when Danielle overheard Nathan talking to another doctor near the nurse's station. "She's competent, sure," Nathan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But let's be honest. She's not exactly what Havencrest represents, is she?" Danielle's heart sank. It wasn't the first time she'd faced such veiled racism, but hearing it so openly, in a place she worked so hard to belong, hit differently. She wanted to confront him, but the risks felt too great. If I push back, will they side with him? That evening, Danielle returned to room 307 to administer Martha's medication. The elderly woman gave her a knowing look. "You're strong, my dear," Martha said softly. "But even the strongest need someone to stand by them." Danielle smiled, but the words lingered. She didn't know what Martha meant or why they felt so significant. Moments later, Nathan barged into the room again, this time accompanied by a junior doctor. Without so much as a greeting, he pointed to the chart in Danielle's hand. "Why hasn't this been updated?" he demanded. "It was updated an hour ago," Danielle replied, her tone calm but firm. "Clearly not," Nathan retorted, snatching the chart from her. Martha's son, Marcus, stood abruptly. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with tension. Nathan barely glanced at him. "Not with the patient, no," he replied dismissively. "But with the staff? That's another matter." Danielle felt her face heat with anger and humiliation. Before she could respond, Martha spoke. "Doctor," she said, her tone cutting through the tension, "is this how you treat all your nurses, or just the ones who look like her?" The room fell silent. Nathan opened his mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it. Instead, he turned on his heel and left without another word. After Nathan's departure, Danielle turned to Martha. "Thank you, but you didn't have to do that." Martha's eyes twinkled. "Oh, but I did. Sometimes people need reminding that respect isn't optional." Danielle chuckled softly, her tension easing for the first time all day. Marcus and his sister Elena both offered her encouraging smiles. "You're not alone in this," Marcus said. "Some battles are worth fighting." For the first time in months, Danielle felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe things could change. The next morning, Danielle found herself summoned to the chief administrator's office. Nathan was already there, his expression smug. "She's insubordinate," Nathan began, launching into a tirade about Danielle's supposed incompetence. Danielle defended herself, recounting the events with professionalism and clarity. The administrator seemed torn, but ultimately sided with Nathan, citing his seniority. The decision stung, but Danielle refused to let it break her. "I'll do my job to the best of my ability, as I always have," she said firmly before leaving the office. Outside, she found Marcus waiting. "Rough day?" he asked. "You could say that," she replied with a weak smile. "Hang in there," Marcus said. "This isn't over yet." Danielle raised an eyebrow, puzzled by his words. As the day progressed, Danielle noticed a shift in the Ellis family's behavior. Marcus made several phone calls, speaking in hushed tones, while Elena typed furiously on her laptop. Martha, meanwhile, watched everything with a serene smile, as if she knew something no one else did. Danielle couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing a vital piece of the puzzle. Who were these people? And why did they seem so deliberate? The answers, she knew, would come soon enough. But as she moved through her shift, the tension continued to mount. Nathan's actions had set a fire beneath her resolve, and she was determined to prove her worth, not just to him, but to herself. Little did she know, the Ellis family was preparing for their own confrontation, one that would turn the tables in ways no one could have anticipated. As the hospital's sterile halls echoed with the weight of unspoken truths, the stage was set for a showdown that would test everyone's character and change Havencrest forever. The next morning at Havencrest Hospital began like any other. The air buzzed with a routine sense of urgency as nurses and doctors hurried through their tasks. Danielle, however, felt a peculiar tension in the atmosphere, as though an unseen storm was brewing. Her shift started with rounds in room 307, where Martha Ellis greeted her warmly. Marcus and Elena were unusually animated, whispering to each other as they hovered near their mother's bedside. Danielle tried to ignore the unease prickling her senses, chalking it up to fatigue. During her lunch break, Danielle passed the hospital's small media room, where a few staff members gathered to watch the news. She heard snippets of the broadcast, a corporate lawsuit, the words, "hospital negligence," and something about an influential family. Intrigued, she paused to listen, only for the sound of her name to snap her back to reality. Turning, she saw Nathan standing behind her, his arms crossed and his usual smug expression in place. "Eavesdropping, Nurse Robinson," he sneered. Danielle bit back a retort. "Just passing by, Dr. Harding." "Good," he said, his tone sharp. "Focus on your duties instead of distractions." His condescension, though predictable, ignited a simmering anger in her chest. She refused to let him provoke her. Later that afternoon, Danielle was called to the administrator's office again, this time for an urgent matter. As she stepped inside, she found Nathan already seated, his expression a mix of annoyance and smug satisfaction. The administrator, Mr. Langford, looked uneasy. "Ms. Robinson, we've received a formal complaint," he began, sliding a paper across the desk. "Dr. Harding has raised concerns about your conduct in room 307. Danielle's heart sank. "What kind of concerns?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his tone laced with false professionalism. "Repeated insubordination, failing to follow orders promptly, undermining my authority in front of patients." Danielle's fist clenched beneath the table, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Sir," she said, addressing Mr. Langford directly, "I've always acted in the best interest of my patients. Dr. Harding's accusations are baseless." The administrator sighed, clearly caught in the middle. "We'll conduct a review," he said, his voice weary. "In the meantime, I expect both of you to maintain professionalism." Nathan smirked as Danielle left the office, the weight of his false accusations pressing down on her. Back in room 307, Danielle found Marcus pacing near the window, his phone pressed to his ear. Eleanor was typing furiously on her laptop, and Martha observed everything with her usual calm. "Rough day, Danielle?" Martha asked, her voice gentle. Danielle offered a tired smile. You could say that. Before she could say more, Marcus ended his call and turned to her. Danielle, he said, his tone serious, has Dr. Harding been causing trouble for you? Danielle hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. He's challenging to work with, she admitted. Marcus exchanged a glance with Elena, who nodded. Don't worry, Marcus said, his voice steady. We're handling it. Danielle frowned, puzzled. What do you mean? Elena looked up from her laptop. Let's just say, Doctor, Harding's about to learn the meaning of accountability. The next day, Danielle's curiosity piqued when she saw an unusual number of security personnel stationed around the hospital. Whispers spread among the staff about a high-profile visitor, but no one seemed to know who it was. Around noon, Danielle was summoned to room 307, where she found Nathan already there, his demeanor unusually stiff. The Ellis family sat together, their expressions carefully neutral. Before Danielle could speak, the door opened, and a man in an impeccable suit walked in, followed by two aides. The tension in the room escalated instantly. Good afternoon, the man said, his voice commanding yet calm. I'm Andrew Ellis, Martha's husband. Danielle's breath caught. Ellis, as in the Ellis Corporation. Suddenly, everything clicked. The whispered phone calls, the laptop, the media buzz. The Ellis family wasn't just influential, they were one of the most powerful families in the state. Nathan's face paled. Mr. Ellis, he stammered, it's an honor. Andrew held up a hand, cutting him off. I'm here to address a troubling matter, he said, his gaze shifting between Nathan and Danielle. Turning to Danielle, he added, We've heard about your dedication to your patients, Ms. Robinson. My wife speaks highly of you. Danielle blinked, caught off guard. Thank you, Mr. Ellis, she said softly. Andrew's expression hardened as he looked at Nathan. Doctor Harding, on the other hand, has been less than professional. Nathan sputtered, struggling to regain his composure. Sir, I assure you, Andrew's voice sharpened. Spare me your excuses. We've documented your behavior, including your treatment of Ms. Robinson. It's unacceptable. Danielle's heart raced as Andrew continued, his words cutting through the air like a blade. My family doesn't tolerate discrimination or incompetence, he said firmly. As of this moment, I'm filing a formal complaint with the hospital board. The news spread through Havencrest like wildfire. Staff whispered in hushed tones about Nathan's impending review, and many expressed quiet relief. Danielle, though stunned by the turn of events, felt a sense of vindication. For the first time, she saw Nathan's confidence falter, his smug demeanor replaced by a veneer of desperation. That evening, as she prepared to leave, Martha called her over. Danielle, she said, her tone warm, you stood tall even when it wasn't easy. Remember, strength comes in many forms. Danielle smiled, gratitude welling up inside her. Thank you, Mrs. Ellis. I'll never forget your kindness. As she walked out of the hospital, the weight of the past days lifted slightly. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time Danielle felt hope. Hope that justice would prevail and that her worth would no longer be questioned. Little did she know, the Ellis family had more surprises in store, and the drama at Havencrest was far from over. The tension in Havencrest Hospital reached a boiling point in the days following Andrew Ellis's visit. Whispers about Nathan Harding's misconduct and the Ellis family's involvement circulated among the staff. The hospital board had called an emergency meeting, and rumors suggested that Nathan's fate would be decided there. For Danielle, the days leading up to the meeting were filled with a mixture of anxiety and resolve. She knew she would be called upon to testify, and while the thought of standing against Nathan terrified her, she also understood that this was her chance to ensure justice for herself and anyone else who had suffered under his behavior. The boardroom was a stark contrast to the bustling hospital corridors. Its pristine white walls and large polished table gave the room a clinical yet imposing feel. At one end sat the hospital's administrators and board members, their expressions a mix of curiosity and gravitas. Nathan sat on one side of the table, his demeanor unusually subdued. Gone was the smug confidence that had once defined him. In its place was a thinly veiled desperation. Danielle sat opposite him, flanked by a union representative and a silent but supportive Andrew Ellis. The proceedings began with Mr. Langford, the hospital administrator, summarizing the allegations against Nathan. The list was extensive, ranging from discriminatory remarks to unprofessional behavior toward colleagues and patients. "Dr. Harding," Langford said, his tone firm, "you've been accused of creating a hostile work environment and undermining our values of respect and professionalism. What do you have to say in your defense?" Nathan cleared his throat, his voice shaky but defiant. "I've always acted in the best interest of my patients in the hospital. These accusations are exaggerated and baseless, fueled by personal vendettas." Langford nodded, then turned to Danielle. "Ms. Robinson, would you like to share your perspective?" Danielle took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. As she stood, she felt the weight of the room's attention settle on her. "I've worked at Havencrest for 5 years," she began, her voice steady, despite the lump in her throat. "In that time, I've dedicated myself to providing the best care possible for my patients. But working under Dr. Harding has been one of the most challenging experiences of my career." She described specific incidents where Nathan had humiliated her in front of patients and staff, recounting the pain and frustration she had felt. Dr. Harding's behavior isn't just unprofessional, it's harmful. It creates an environment where staff feel undervalued and disrespected, which ultimately affects patient care, she concluded, her voice tinged with emotion. As Danielle spoke, she noticed subtle shifts in the board members' expressions. Furrowed brows, exchanged glances. Nathan, on the other hand, squirmed uncomfortably in his seat. His earlier bravado completely dissolved. When Danielle finished, Nathan shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "This is a witch hunt," he exclaimed, his voice rising. "She's twisting the narrative to make herself look like a victim. I've been nothing but professional." Andrew Ellis, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Nathan's outburst. "Dr. Harding," Andrew said, his voice cold and measured, "you can try to deflect responsibility, but the evidence speaks for itself." He gestured toward a stack of papers in front of him. "We've gathered statements from multiple staff members, documenting instances of your misconduct. These aren't isolated incidents. They paint a clear picture of your behavior." Nathan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. At that moment, a woman entered the room carrying a laptop. She handed it to Langford, who projected a video onto the room's large screen. The footage showed Nathan berating Danielle in the hallway outside room 307, his words dripping with disdain. "This," Langford said, pausing the video, "was captured by a security camera just days ago. Dr. Harding, do you deny this behavior? Nathan's face turned a deep shade of red. I was frustrated. It was a stressful day. Langford's expression hardened. Stress doesn't excuse discrimination or harassment. As the board deliberated, the tension in the room was palpable. Finally, Langford addressed Nathan directly. Dr. Harding, he said, his tone resolute, it's clear that your actions are incompatible with the values of Haven Crest Hospital. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. Nathan's face crumbled, his carefully constructed facade shattering. You can't do this, he whispered, his voice filled with desperation. I've dedicated my life to this hospital. And you've betrayed its principles, Langford replied firmly. This decision is final. As Nathan left the room, his head hung low. A wave of relief washed over Danielle. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen and heard. Andrew Ellis stood and approached her, his expression warm. You showed incredible courage today, Danielle, he said. My family and I are grateful for everything you've done for Martha. If there's ever anything you need, don't hesitate to reach out. Danielle smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Your support means more than I can say. The meeting's outcome sent ripples through Haven Crest. Nathan's departure marked a turning point for the hospital, signaling a renewed commitment to respect and professionalism. For Danielle, it was more than just a professional victory. It was a personal triumph. She had faced her greatest challenge and emerged stronger, proving that integrity and perseverance could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. As she walked out of the boardroom, the weight of the past weeks lifted from her shoulders. The sun was setting outside, casting a warm glow over the hospital grounds. For the first time in a long time, Danielle felt at peace. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a brighter, more hopeful chapter in her life. It was a quiet morning when Danielle stepped into Haven Crest Hospital once more. The tension that had hung in the air for weeks seemed to dissipate as she walked through the hospital's sterile hallways. The gossip about Nathan Harding's departure had settled, but its impact lingered. The hospital staff now moved with a renewed sense of purpose, and the patients felt the difference too. No longer did they see the scornful glare of a man who saw them as less than, but rather a team united in the mission of care. Danielle's office was on the 3rd floor, near the pediatric ward, a place that had always been her refuge. She sat at her desk, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows across her paperwork. It was as though the world had shifted, allowing her a moment of stillness after the storm. The noise of the hospital outside seemed muffled, as if a new peace had settled in. Her cell phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from Andrew Ellis. Thank you for your bravery, Danielle. The support from our family and the staff has been overwhelming. You've inspired more people than you know. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She had been afraid that standing up for herself would isolate her from the people she worked with. But instead, her courage had sparked a wave of solidarity. Days passed, and with each one, Danielle found herself growing in ways she hadn't expected. Her colleagues, many of whom had stayed silent out of fear, now openly praised her. They spoke of her as a hero, not just for her actions, but for the way she had remained composed in the face of adversity. Danielle had always prided herself on her work ethic and her ability to empathize with her patients. But now she realized she had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed, the ability to stand firm when it mattered most. Yet, as the accolades poured in, Danielle remained humble. She knew that her victory wasn't just about her. It was a victory for every person who had ever been silenced by fear or held back by the threat of retaliation. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Her growth was not just professional but personal as well. She had always been a private person, reluctant to share her feelings or needs with others. But as her relationship with Andrew deepened, so did her trust in others. She started to open up, to ask for help when she needed it, to let herself be vulnerable. She had faced one of the hardest battles of her life and emerged not just intact, but stronger. In the weeks following Nathan's removal, the hospital underwent a transformation. New leadership was brought in, and policies were enacted to prevent future harassment and discrimination. The board implemented mandatory workshops on professional conduct, emphasizing respect and integrity in the workplace. For Danielle, these changes were bittersweet. She wished they hadn't been necessary, but she also knew they were long overdue. She hoped they would create a culture where no one would ever have to face what she had gone through. Danielle's story is one of courage, but more than that, it is a story of justice. Justice isn't just about courtroom victories or legal decisions. Sometimes it's about standing up in the face of fear, speaking the truth, even when the consequences are unclear, and doing what's right despite the personal cost. The lesson in Danielle's journey is clear. When we stand up for ourselves, we not only change our own lives, but we pave the way for others to do the same. Danielle's decision to speak out against Nathan Harding was not just about holding one man accountable. It was about making a stand for the greater good. It was about saying, no, this behavior will not be tolerated, and I will not allow it to go unchecked. Her triumph was not only in the removal of a toxic influence from her workplace, but in the confidence she had gained to stand her ground, to use her voice, and to trust in her own worth. Danielle had always known her worth, but it took a moment of extreme adversity to truly understand its value. As Danielle sat in the hospital courtyard one afternoon, reflecting on everything that had transpired, she realized just how much had changed. The woman who had once shied away from conflict now stood as a symbol of strength and integrity. She knew that her journey didn't end with Nathan's departure. It was only the beginning of a larger, more important mission. The most important lesson Danielle had learned was that silence never protects anyone. It only perpetuates harm. Standing up for what's right, no matter the cost, is the truest form of self-respect. In doing so, we honor not only ourselves, but those around us as well. As the camera pulls back from Danielle's contemplative figure, the viewer is left with a question. What would you do if you were in Danielle's shoes? We all face moments in life where we have to make hard choices. Sometimes, the right choice is the one that scares us the most. But remember, true courage lies not in avoiding fear, but in overcoming it. Danielle's journey is a powerful reminder that we must never allow injustice to go unchecked. Each of us has the ability to make a difference, no matter how daunting the challenge may seem. And sometimes, that difference starts with the simple act of standing up and speaking out. If Danielle's story moved you, if you felt her courage and her resolve, then let it inspire you to stand up for what is right in your own life. Share this story with others. Talk about it. And most importantly, take action in your own world. Because as Danielle's journey has shown, when we stand together, we can bring about real change. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, justice, and perseverance.